I pulled up to the house at 6:22 p.m., 12 minutes late. Not late enough to warrant the looks I got, but late enough to know they'd already decided I was the problem. The balloons were still floating, half deflated against the porch rail, and the giant silver 70 stood tall in the yard. His big day. My father. Everyone was already inside. I could hear the laughter through the windows, loud and layered, the kind that says, "We're doing fine without you." I stood outside the door a moment longer than I should have. Something in my chest tightened, like I was about to walk into a stranger's celebration. Except these weren't strangers. They were blood, or so they liked to say, when it suited them. When I stepped in, the music hit first. Country oldies, his favorites. Then the smell of pot roast and wine. And then the chill. Not from the air conditioning, from the people. No one turned. No one said my name. Not even a nod. I made my way through the crowd, offering small smiles that felt ridiculous the moment they left my face. My brother Michael glanced up and looked through me like I was a shadow. Amanda, my older sister, gave me that once-over she reserved for supermarket strangers, top to bottom, eyes tight, lips tighter. "Well," she said, "I see the goodwill is still keeping you in business." She didn't even wait for a response. My cousin Troy laughed too loud at a joke that had nothing to do with me and said under his breath, "Didn't think she'd show her face." They weren't whispering well. One voice floated behind me, sharp like broken glass. "Who even invited her?" Another one chimed in. "She probably invited herself, always desperate to be seen." I pretended not to hear. Pretended I had a reason to be there beyond biology. But I'd brought a gift, a handmade photo collage. I spent nights on it. My fingertips still had glue residue. Back when birthdays were different, I used to organize them, call caterers, pick up cakes. I once spent a whole week decorating the backyard for my mom's 65th. No one thanked me. This time, they hadn't even texted. The photographer called for a group photo. "Immediate family to the patio, please." I took a step forward, instinct more than intent. But Michael raised a hand. "Just immediate, Layla." I stared at him. "I mean, you were late anyway," he added with a shrug. "What's the point?" Someone laughed behind me. Maybe Amanda? Maybe Troy? Maybe the house? Dad didn't say a word. He sipped his scotch and looked away. I stood there, 10 feet from them, feeling every eye that wasn't on me. I backed off slowly, trying not to trip on my own shame. My palms were sweaty, my throat felt like cardboard. I whispered to myself, "Just a picture, let it go." But it wasn't just a picture, it was proof. Proof that I didn't belong. Not really. The toast came next. Dad was on his third drink. His face flushed, eyes shiny with that half-drunken confidence he always wore like a crown. "To my kids," he shouted, raising his glass. To Michael, smart as a whip. Amanda, beautiful as her mother. He paused when his eyes hit me. And Layla, well, she made it, folks. Crawled out of whatever cave she's been hiding in. Must have gotten lost on the way here looking for a mirror. Laughter. Not the warm kind, the sharp, panicked kind people use when they don't know what else to do. "You're too ugly to be here, sweetheart," he added, grinning like it was a compliment. I felt heat climb up my neck. My face went numb. Someone near me said softly, "Come on, it's just a joke." A child tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Why's Aunt Layla sad?" I couldn't breathe. I made my way down the hall and slipped into the laundry room, closed the door, sat on the washing machine like it was a lifeboat. I didn't cry, not yet. I stared at the floor tiles and thought about prom night, how he said my dress made me look like a bag of rags. I'd cried then, a lot, but not today. I pulled out my phone. He said it again, in front of everyone. I typed to my friend Jenna. Her reply came fast. "Leave, now." But I stayed a moment longer. I thought of the times I swallowed it, bit down on my tongue so hard it bled. Family first, family above all. But what kind of family tears you down to feel taller? I looked around. A mop, some bleach, a broken ironing board. Felt fitting. My gift was still in my car. I stepped back into the party. They were laughing at something again. Probably Michael's story about his new Tesla. I heard Amanda call someone babe and roll her eyes dramatically. Then came the final straw. She's always been the weird one, someone whispered. Let her be. I didn't see who said it, didn't care. I grabbed my bag from the hall closet, walked out to my car, retrieved the gift. It carried it in like it weighed nothing. I walked past the entire group and placed the collage right in front of Dad. He looked up, slightly confused, then smiled like he was expecting a thank you. I didn't say a word. In my head, I said plenty. This is the last time I show up like I owe them something. Then I turned around and walked straight out. I stepped back into the crowd, the murmur of conversation washing over me like cold water. My face still burned from what had happened earlier, but I held my chin up. I couldn't give them what they wanted, a broken version of me. The table gleamed under string lights, filled with wine glasses and fake smiles. Laughter spilled out, sharp and hollow, bouncing off the walls until it pressed against my chest. Every word, every sound seemed meant for me, though no one said my name. The air smelled of barbecue sauce and perfume, thick enough to choke on. I whispered to myself, breathe, stay calm. They don't get to see you fall apart. Dad rose from his chair, tapping his glass with the handle of his knife. That familiar, commanding sound sliced through the chatter. All eyes turned toward him. I sat still, quiet, watching the scene unfold like an actor who'd been cut from the final act but couldn't leave the stage. He cleared his throat, beaming as if we were all gathered to honor a man who'd built something pure. I just want to take a moment, he said, to thank everyone for being here tonight. It means the world to have family close. His gaze swept over the table, skipping right past me. And of course, to my daughter Millie. What a remarkable young woman. Dedicated. Beautiful. Always carrying this family's name with pride. Millie's lipstick glistened under the lights as she smiled back at him. Her hand brushed his arm gently, like they'd practiced it. Then she glanced at me. It wasn't a long look, just enough for me to know it was intentional. The kind of look that says, remember your place. Everyone clapped. Someone shouted, to Millie! Champagne glasses clinked. I kept my hands under the table, fingers locked together to stop the trembling. The applause felt endless, and the sound burrowed deep under my skin. When it finally quieted, Dad turned toward me. His grin was too wide, too rehearsed. And our Layla, he said, the words sliding out like syrup that's already gone sour. The artist of the family. You've always had a creative mind. A few polite smiles appeared. I almost thought maybe this time he'd stop there, but then came the smirk. Too bad no one can hang your art without feeling sorry for you. A soft ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved around the table. Someone whispered, oh, come on. Dad ignored it, raising his glass higher. You're too ugly to be here anyway. The room froze. The silence came first, then the kind of laughter that doesn't come from amusement. It comes from fear. People laughed because they didn't know what else to do. I sat motionless. My body felt miles away from my mind. The sound in my ears turned faint, like I was underwater. I remembered something my therapist once said. People mock what they fear in themselves. I held on to that sentence like it was air. Dad chuckled, satisfied, and turned away to pour himself another drink. The conversation resumed, but it wasn't the same. I could hear my heart pounding louder than their voices. Then came the next performance. Now, Millie, he called. You're the real pride of this family." She stood with perfect grace, fixing her dress before leaning in to hug him. Camera flashes lit up the room. I could see my reflection blinking in one of the lenses, blurred, small. A slideshow started on the big screen. Photos of Millie's awards, magazine features, charity events. Every image framed her as flawless. I recognized one project. I had helped design it, spent weeks on it. But when my cousin whispered, "Didn't Layla work on that too?" Millie smiled without turning her head. "She tried," she said, soft but sharp. It landed like a knife, not because it was cruel, but because it was casual, like I wasn't even worth malice, just dismissal. I looked down at my wine glass. The liquid trembled slightly. My reflection stared back, distorted and scattered. For a moment, the laughter and applause around me blurred into one long hum. My body was still there, but my mind drifted. Back to my teenage years, standing by my art display at school, listening to Dad tell a teacher that my work was cute but depressing. I had promised myself it wouldn't sting anymore, that I'd learn to take it, but the truth was, it always found a way to burn. The thought crept in before I could stop it. What if they're right? Then another voice, quieter but stronger, answered inside me. No, they don't define me. I built my world without them. The moment I accepted that thought, something in me settled. I took a sip of the wine, bitter, grounding, real. The music picked up again, cheerful and false. Conversations bloomed as if nothing had happened. I stood slowly, careful not to scrape the chair against the floor. No one looked up. I walked toward the dessert table where the cake sat, untouched on one side, and placed my gift beside Millie's bouquet. Her flowers bright and perfect, mine wrapped in plain paper. I turned one last time. Dad was laughing again, holding Millie close, his face red from the alcohol and pride. He looked happy, completely unaware that this would be the last time he'd ever have me in his audience. He didn't know the truth. The resort he bragged about, the one he visited every summer to play the generous man, it was mine. I'd bought it 2 years ago, quietly. The paperwork signed under a name he never remembered belonged to me. I didn't need revenge. I already had it. I walked out into the night, the cool air stinging my cheeks. Behind me, the laughter followed, faint and hollow. It used to hurt. Now, it was just proof of who he really was, and who I no longer had to be. The apartment was dead quiet, but inside my head, everything screamed. I hadn't changed out of my dress. The zipper tugged at my ribs every time I shifted, but I didn't have it in me to care. I sat at the small dining table under the dim kitchen light. Just me, a glass of water, and a clock ticking past 2 a.m. My hands were still trembling, even hours after I'd left the party. I thought the silence would help, but it only gave my memories room to stretch out. A photo frame on the counter caught my eye. It had sat there for years, untouched. Me, Millie, Mom, and Dad on some family hike. I stared at it, not really seeing it. "I don't know why I expected anything different tonight," I muttered. The words felt old, worn out from how often they'd lived in my throat. Then it came. That memory I'd buried under years of distractions and grown-up routines. It surfaced like it had been waiting. It was the day we went to family counseling. I don't even remember what triggered it. Some fight, some door slammed too hard. I just remember the air being thick in that office, like the room was holding its breath. The therapist had asked us each to speak. When it was my turn, I'd opened up, really opened up, for the first time. I talked about feeling left out, invisible, about how nothing I did ever seemed to count. Dad sat across from me, calm, legs crossed. Then, in the same tone he'd used to order a sandwich, he said, "She's always been a burden, sensitive, dramatic." That moment split something inside me. The therapist tried to steer the session back to balance, but it was too late. I remember the silence that followed. My mother looked down at her hands. Millie raised an eyebrow, almost smiling. No one said a word in my defense. That was the moment I stopped believing family equaled safety. That word, burden, stuck. It grew roots in my brain. Another memory rushed in behind it. The fallout. I remember Millie making calls that night. Soft voice, concerned tone. Layla's just not well. She's overwhelmed. You know how she gets. The next time I saw my aunt, she looked at me like I was a ticking bomb. At weddings, holiday dinners, school fundraisers, I caught those glances. Pity mixed with discomfort. Not one of them asked me directly. They didn't need to. Millie had already written the script. I'd never been diagnosed with anything, never had an outburst, never been a problem in school. But none of that mattered. The label stuck. I'd been cast as unstable without a single scene to defend myself. You don't need proof when the lie is easier to believe than the truth, I whispered, staring at the floor. That sentence didn't come from a book. It came from my life. But here's the part I hated admitting most. I let it happen. I never spoke up, never confronted her. I told myself it wasn't worth it, that keeping the peace was more important. The truth. I was scared and tired. Every time I stayed silent, the lie grew louder. I had handed her the pen, and she rewrote my story in front of everyone. I leaned back in the chair, the wood creaking under me. I thought silence was survival, I said to no one. But it was just slow erasure. I stood, walked to my desk, and opened the laptop. The glow hit my face, harsh and cold. I clicked through folders until I found it, an old video from my first gallery show. I hadn't watched it in years. There I was, on screen, speaking to a full room, calm, clear, not the broken girl they painted. The crowd applauded. My work stood behind me, bold and unashamed. That woman wasn't weak. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't a burden. I made a new folder on the desktop, labeled it Proof. Dragged the video into it. Something in me shifted. They didn't break me, I whispered. They just never saw me. Then I opened a blank document, titled it, Dear Millie. I started typing. Not to send it, not yet. But I needed to say it, to get the words out of my body. I wrote about the counseling session, about the rumors, about the way her words twisted how people saw me. Sentence by sentence, the weight lifted. I ended it with, I'm not your story to rewrite anymore. Just as I hit save, my phone buzzed. I picked it up. Family group chat renamed Millie's birthday weekend. They didn't even wait until Dad's party had cooled off. I walked back into the dining room, putting my shoulders in the posture of someone unbothered. Inside, I felt cracked. The table was bright under chandelier light. Voices floated across platters, and I slid into my seat at the far end. I watched Millie laugh, radiant and comfortable, while my plate stared back at me. The food I'd slaved over, my own recipe for Dad, sat untouched. The conversation flooded the space between us, as though I were air, not flesh. I asked myself quietly, how many times must I fade before they see me? I had poured hours into that meal, selecting the meat, timing the marinade, adjusting the seasoning so it would speak of home. I watched my mother pick up a forkful, raise it, then make that expression she reserves for just okay. She spat it out. This tastes like the cafeteria cooking she does. Heads snapped. Someone murmured, oh, that stings. Millie's grin widened. We should let professionals cater next time, she said, the words soft but lethal. And my chest jammed, blood hot in my ears. For a moment I sat perfectly still, my heart the only thing that moved. Shame pressed against me like walls. In my mind, I replayed every late night I'd spent behind the scenes. Calls to florists, haggles over linens, secret budget spreadsheets no one was meant to see. I remembered Millie praising Dad earlier for arranging the party. I realized no one ever saw what I did. They applauded what she claimed. During the toast, Dad looked at Millie, raised his glass. The success of tonight's dinner is thanks to Millie's organizational skills. Applause erupted. My throat tightened. Millie nodded at me, polite, seamless, as if sharing credit. But she held nothing. I saw the proof in my memory. Emails I drafted, vendor calls I handled, my name absent. A cousin whispered, "She must have helped behind the scenes." Millie just smiled. She tried. The echo of tried felt like acid. In full view of them, I felt erased. My fingers curled under the table. I swallowed a scream. I looked at Dad, then Millie, their faces carved with satisfaction. If credit is stolen, truth must be revealed, I thought. I pulled out my phone, fingers hovering over a file named Party Budget, My Role, Bought PDF. I hesitated. If I exposed this now, it would feel as though I craved validation. But keeping it silent would mean letting them rewrite history. I pushed the phone back into my clutch. I decided, I will strike when they least expect it. I took a steady breath, pushed back my chair, and rose. Without a sound, I walked out of the room. I glanced at Millie. Her eyes flicked to me, surprise in the corners. I left, steady. This is not over. I'm just getting started. The chairs scraped quietly across the floor as we moved from the dining table into the living room. No one said much. A few half-hearted jokes hung in the air like dust motes, floating, forgotten before they landed. I settled into the low chair in the corner where I always ended up. That chair, too small, too close to the floor, had a way of making me feel invisible. Tonight, I didn't mind. I wasn't ready yet. Coffee mugs passed around. Cake slices cut, handed out with the kind of hospitality that only worked if you ignored the tension. The television was on. Some sitcom rerun, volume low, laugh tracks skipping across the room like static. My fingers curled around the warm mug. I took slow sips, letting the bitterness distract me. My eyes moved across the room. Familiar faces. All of them pretending. I could feel something rise inside me, like a pressure building behind my ribs. This wasn't a moment I chose. It had chosen me. Millie's voice sliced through the air like it always did. Some people just can't let things go. Casual, tossed like a pebble into still water. I set my cup down, stood. Why don't you say that directly to me? The room went dead quiet. She smiled, that same smile from years ago. When I told the truth and she turned it into a joke. When I cried and she called me dramatic. That smile, smug, dismissive, untouched by consequence. "Oh, Layla," she said, soft and syrupy, still so sensitive. I didn't blink. "You lied," I said. "About the party, about the planning. You told everyone I was off, unstable, emotional, so they wouldn't listen to me. And it worked. You made me look like a wreck while you stole credit." A few people shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. Millie leaned back, folding her arms. "You're always rewriting history." "No," I said. "I'm just finally correcting yours." There was no rage in my voice. Just the clarity of someone who'd been silent too long. My eyes moved from her to the others. Dad, Aunt Bronwyn, even the cousin who never looked up from his phone. "You all saw it. You've always seen it," I said. "And none of you said anything." Aunt Bronwyn looked down, fingers tapping her mug. My cousin's gaze darted to the hallway. "The opposite of love isn't hate," I said. "It's indifference." And their silence, their persistent, polished silence, hurt more than anything Millie had ever said. Dad sipped his coffee like we weren't even there. I stepped closer to him. Do you think it was funny? I asked. What you said earlier. The crack about me finally showing up on time after a year of therapy? He looked up, blinking, like I just pulled him out of a daydream. What? That was a joke. Don't be dramatic. I nodded slowly. Here's the thing. If you ever mock me again, in private, in public, anywhere, I'm done. Permanently. The room inhaled sharply. A hush fell over everything. No more holidays, no more birthdays, no more showing up, pretending like we're some version of family that actually works. I won't keep making space for people who only want me here if I stay quiet. Dad blinked again. You're threatening me? No, I said. I'm protecting myself. That landed. I saw it. Even Millie's smirk faded for a second. Someone, maybe my uncle, tried to chime in, but I raised a hand. Don't ask me to apologize for being clear. I returned to my seat. Same low chair, same quiet corner. But I didn't feel small this time. I didn't feel invisible. I sat there not to retreat, but to remain, to hold my ground. I saw the unease ripple through them. Little glances, half-swallowed words. For once, they didn't know where to look. And I didn't need them to. The noise resumed, but softer, measured, like everyone was suddenly careful not to be next. Dad stayed silent. Millie didn't look at me again. I picked up my mug, drained the last of my cold coffee, and set it down with purpose. My hands were steady, my breathing even. For the first time, I didn't need their nods or niceties. I had a boundary now, and that was more powerful than their approval. Then someone, I think it was my aunt, laughed awkwardly and said, "Well, who's ready for cake?" After the last guests drifted out, the house felt hollow. Too quiet, too clean, too aware of what had just happened. Someone had turned off the TV, but I could still hear faint echoes of laughter that didn't belong anymore. The smell of coffee lingered, mixed with the faint sweetness of cake. I needed air. I slipped through the glass doors onto the veranda, the night pressing against my skin like a calm hand trying to steady me. The garden lights glowed faintly, hanging in crooked lines along the railing, the same ones I'd strung up last summer, the same ones Millie had claimed credit for. I leaned on the railing, exhaled, watching shadows tremble across the wooden floorboards. My hands were still shaking, though not from fear, from restraint. I took my phone out of my clutch, thumb hovering above the screen, ready to send what I'd been holding for months. But stopped. They saw me when it made them feel generous. They ignored me when it made them feel small. That was the rule of this family, and I had followed it too long. In the dim light, his face came back to me, my father's. That look across the table, blank and distant, like his eyes couldn't focus on me even if he tried. No anger, no recognition, just emptiness. As though I didn't exist. I had spoken directly to him, looked right at him, and still it was like talking to a wall. I replayed it again and again under the soft buzz of the veranda lights. Why do I keep showing up? I whispered. The question fell into the night, unanswered. My throat tightened as memory unrolled. Millie glowing under praise that was supposed to be shared. Dad's voice echoing from years ago. She's got something special, doesn't she? He never meant harm, but he never saw the harm either. Every small dismissal carved a hollow space where I used to want to belong. I rubbed my thumb over the phone screen, catching my reflection in the glass. Tired eyes, a woman who had spent decades apologizing for existing in someone else's shadow. I was here all along, I said quietly. Just not allowed to matter. I went back inside. The air had shifted, quieter, heavier. Someone had stacked plates on the counter, but no one had started cleaning. I walked to my purse, unzipped it, and pulled out a slim folder labeled Proof. It had become my quiet armor. My phone glowed as I scrolled through what I'd collected. Email threads where Millie copied my event drafts, removed my name, and sent them on as hers. Receipts from vendors I'd paid, photos of decorations I'd hung, captioned online as her vision. Every small theft stacked neatly, piece by piece. I stopped at one image, the backyard from last summer, lights draped above the tables, laughter everywhere, everyone praising her. No one remembered I'd stayed up until midnight stringing those lights while she left early to get her nails done. My stomach twisted, not from sadness, but from resolve. I knew what had to happen. Tonight wasn't just another family dinner. It was the reckoning I'd postponed for years. When I returned to the living room, a few people still lingered. Dad, Mom, Millie, and one cousin pretending to scroll through her phone to avoid eye contact. Millie sat on the couch, legs tucked under her, completely relaxed, like none of this touched her. I stood in the doorway for a long second before I spoke. "You keep pretending not to understand," I said. My voice was low even. "But the receipts don't lie." She looked up, smiling like I'd told a joke. "Layla, are we still on this?" I held up my phone. The screen glowed blue against the dark. "These are my emails, my notes, my invoices. You forwarded my plans and took the credit." The air snapped. Millie laughed, soft, mocking, trying to turn it into another scene. "You always dramatize everything." I took a step closer. "No, Millie. You minimize everything." Dad stirred, rising halfway from his seat. "That's enough," he said. I lifted my hand. "No, you've said enough for a lifetime. Just listen." I turned back to Millie. "You took my work and built your reputation on it. You lied about me, called me unstable when I stopped helping you. And everyone here—" I swept my gaze across the room. "Let you." Silence stretched. Even the hum of the fridge in the next room seemed too loud. Mom's hands clasped together like a prayer she didn't know how to finish. My cousin froze, eyes darting between us. Millie straightened, her mask slipping. "You're making this bigger than it is." "I'm making it as big as it should have been years ago," I said. "And for once you don't get to control the story." No one spoke. My voice wavered, not from weakness, but from the weight of finally saying what had been choking me all this time. I wondered briefly if I'd gone too far, if they'd just twist this into another episode. But then I saw my reflection again in the dark TV screen, my shoulders square, my eyes clear. I didn't look broken, I looked awake. Truth doesn't have to shout, it just needs to stay standing. I slid my phone back into my clutch, the sound of the clasp clicking shut louder than anyone's response. Then I looked straight at Dad. "This ends tonight," I said. "Either you treat me like your daughter, or I walk away." Millie's smirk flickered, caught between defiance and fear. Dad opened his mouth, but no words came. I turned, walking toward the glass doors. The cool air spilled in as I opened them, the soft glow of the string lights stretching into the dark yard. I didn't close the door behind me. I didn't need to. They thought ignoring me would keep me small. But they'd only taught me how to stand in silence, until it was their turn to feel it. The night dragged. People trickled out in clumps, jackets slipping over shoulders, quick goodbyes, leftovers packed into foil. I stayed seated, one leg crossed, hands clasped in my lap, back straight like I was holding something up. I didn't move. Millie remained across the room, relaxed as if she were the hostess, not the fraud. Aunt Bronwyn whispered something under her breath, barely audible over the hum of the still-playing TV. Nobody was watching it. Dad's voice echoed in my ears, his earlier toast, clumsy but enthusiastic. "Thank you, sons and daughters, for making this night special." He had looked right past me. I didn't even blink. I just swallowed that hollow space where my name should have lived. It stayed there, stuck. That kind of omission doesn't land like a slap. It sinks in like smoke. Quiet, lingering, staining everything. Dad stood again, glass raised. Before we all go our ways, thank you again. Millie for your charm. Corbin for your help. And of course, your mother for everything she does. Murmurs of approval rippled through the room. He took a sip, smiling proudly like he'd nailed it. I froze. My hands clutched my knees. No mention, not even a glance. My name didn't make the cut. I caught Millie's eye. That smirk, polished, quiet, cruel. Someone in the back muttered, "Did he forget someone?" Aunt Bronwyn cleared her throat, but said nothing. Her eyes met mine, then quickly darted away. I sat taller. In my mind, the words pressed like ink on damp paper. Erasure doesn't happen once. It's a rhythm, a repetition, and it worked best in families. No one questioned it because it came dressed as habit. I kept my expression still, forced it not to twitch. I wouldn't give them tears, not anymore. A few minutes later, just as conversation shifted to vacation plans and weather, a child's voice cut through. Thank you to the cleaner who helped set everything up. It was Maisie, Millie's youngest niece, darting through the hallway in socks. She giggled and ran off, unaware she'd dropped a grenade. The room paused. I looked up slowly. A hush swept the air. Heads turned. Some looked down. Some bit their lips, unsure if they should laugh. My mouth went dry. Maisie didn't mean harm. But kids say what they hear. Somewhere, someone called me that. The cleaner. Millie leaned in toward her glass. Bless sweet Maisie for noticing. Her voice dripped with sugar. My teeth clenched. I bit my lip until it hurt. If I'm the cleaner, I thought, then maybe that's all they ever saw. Someone to clean up their messes. Not a daughter, not a sister. Just someone who stayed late, swept quietly, and disappeared before the lights came on. People started talking again, but everything sounded unnatural. Forks scraped plates louder than necessary. Someone knocked over a spoon. I stayed seated, fighting the urge to get up, to leave, to shout. My mind spun. Retaliation? Restraint? Which was survival? Millie caught my eye again. This time, there was a flicker of warning behind the smile. She knew I was close to snapping. Dad stood suddenly, rubbing his hands together. Let's call it a night, he said. His voice tried for cheerful, but it hit the wall. My eyes narrowed. I leaned forward. Enough. I stood slowly. My movement silenced the room more than any outburst could have. My shoes pressed into the carpet. One step, two, toward the center of the room. If my work is that invisible, I began, then maybe it's time you saw me. Chairs shifted. Conversation stopped. Even the TV volume seemed to lower. I kept walking, not rushing, just steady. I passed the side table, the dining chairs, their faces. I stopped beside Dad. He looked at me, not confused, just unreadable. I wasn't born to be silent, I said. I didn't show up tonight to pour wine and pick up trash. I turned to the group. I spent weeks organizing this. Nights texting vendors, calls after work. I paid for the desserts out of my own pocket when the caterer fell through. No one noticed. No one cared. I let it land. You thanked everyone. You skipped me. That wasn't a mistake. That was the point. People froze. Some looked down. A few looked like they wanted to vanish into the furniture. Millie raised a brow but said nothing. The power wasn't hers tonight. I let the silence stretch, just long enough. Then I turned, slow, deliberate. My heels sounded sharp on the tile. I walked toward the front door without looking back. Each step peeled something off my shoulders. A layer of apology, a layer of waiting, a layer of needing permission. The door opened with a soft creak. A gust of air slipped through, crisp, unbothered. I stood in the frame. No one followed. No one called my name. I looked back once. Their faces frozen mid-thought. I didn't need them to speak. I already knew what silence meant in this house. I will no longer be the echo, I told myself. I will be the voice. Then I stepped out and shut the door behind me. I stepped onto the garden terrace. The string lights dangled overhead, swaying just enough to cast dancing shadows across the cobblestone. Night air pressed against my skin, not quite cold, but biting. Music floated from the inside, muffled by glass doors. It was meant to be celebratory, but to me it sounded distant, hollow. A long table stretched before me, dressed in candlelight and expensive linen. One chair sat empty, mine. Glasses lined up neatly, except for the one space where a wine flute should have been. A small detail, but it said everything. They'd designed beauty tonight. Drapes, flowers, ambiance. Yet it all felt staged, like I'd been written out of a play I co-wrote. I stood still, letting the scene settle. This wasn't about survival anymore. I wasn't there to be tolerated. I was there to be seen. As I waited for the last guest to settle, my eyes caught a shimmer off the terrace window. At first, I didn't realize it was my own reflection. I walked closer. Well, there she was, face tight, jaw clenched, something fierce in the eyes. Not someone broken, not anymore, but not untouched either. There were lines I hadn't noticed before, a stillness that wasn't peace. I stared. I let myself really see it. The tired girl who once stood in corners, who got handed jobs but never credit. The one who cleaned up party messes while others took bows. I used to think if I just worked harder, I'd earn a place. But now I understood. Some rooms aren't broken. They're built to keep you out. I whispered to that mirror, I know who I was, and I know what I built. I saw her blink, just once, then straighten. That was enough. When I turned back toward the table, the toast had already begun. Millie stood, glass raised, grinning for the crowd. Her voice rang out. To family, to legacy, to the ones who make it all happen. Polite clinks followed. I reached for my own glass, but there was none. Just the naked wood of the table where my glass should have been. I looked at the host staff near the terrace door. One shifted, another glanced down, avoiding me. Dad stood beside Millie, lifting his glass without hesitation. That was it. I walked forward, slow, steady. I guess some people can't handle having all the pieces on the table. Millie's head turned fast. Her smile faltered just enough. Guests shuffled. Whispers moved like a current. I didn't wait for an answer. I pulled my phone from my clutch and walked toward the projector stand near the flower arch. The Bluetooth connected. I opened the folder I'd protected for years. It simply said, Proof. I hit play. The screen behind them lit up, bright and undeniable. Emails with my name. Contracts signed under my LLC. Planning documents showing timestamps, edits, budgets. My budget. Receipts for furniture rentals. My design drafts. My payments. My name. One document enlarged. Ownership title. The resort deed. My initials stamped, dated, verified. Gasps burst through the terrace like firecrackers. Some people stood, others sat, stunned. A few turned to Dad. His mouth didn't move. I spoke, quiet but clear. Everything you've dismissed, everything you laughed off, every effort you minimized, it all belongs to me now. Millie didn't blink. Her glass hung in the air, frozen. Dad looked at me like I'd just taken the floor out from under him. I kept going. You didn't forget me. You erased me. Because it served you. Because it made things easier. Because I wouldn't play small. Aunt Bronwyn said something to the woman next to her. Heads turned. My voice didn't shake. Tonight, you watched me disappear. Tomorrow, you'll watch me take up space. I stepped forward into the light, my shadow stretched behind me across the stone. I looked taller, not because I was, but because I wasn't bending anymore. Millie opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I closed my laptop gently, tucked it under my arm, and turned toward the building. As I passed through the doorway, someone near the buffet whispered, "She did all that?" The door closed behind me with a firm thud, not loud, but final. In my mind, they'll never laugh at me again. The morning came gently. I stepped out into the garden barefoot, coffee in hand, robe brushing against my calves. The sun had just broken the lake's surface, and everything shimmered in that soft, forgiving gold. The hedges were still damp with dew. Somewhere in the distance, I heard trays clinking, the staff prepping for brunch. But out here, it was quiet. A real kind of quiet. No tension pressing against my ribs. No rehearsing comebacks. No preparing myself for what I'd have to prove. The resort didn't just feel like mine. It was mine. Not the paperwork. That had been true for years. But the space. The spirit. The right to exist here without shrinking. Last night's chaos had settled into silence, and for the first time in years, I didn't wake up bracing for someone else's disapproval. My phone buzzed. A text from Millie. 3 words. Didn't expect that. A laughing emoji. Even now, she didn't know how to speak with sincerity. Or maybe she never learned how to lose without mocking the game. I typed, "You never expected me. That's the difference." Then deleted it. There was nothing left to win. No need to swing back at a punch that never landed. I didn't block her to hurt her. I blocked her because peace has a price, and that price is access. I turned off the screen and looked back at the lake. Still, wide, honest. Later, I walked toward the main building. My sandals left faint prints across the stone. In the lobby, I almost missed her. Aunt Bronwyn. She stood near the front desk, hands wrung together, eyes unsure. I slowed. "I owe you something," she said. I didn't speak. "I knew," she added. "I always knew you were behind the resort. I just—" Millie was louder. "And your father—" She stopped. The silence between us filled in the blanks. She took a breath. "I'm sorry." It didn't fix everything, but it loosened something tight in my chest. I nodded. "Thank you." As I turned to leave, she said quietly, "You were never invisible, Layla. You just terrified them." I didn't respond, but her words followed me like a hand on my shoulder. By mid-morning, I was seated with the management team. The tone was different, less deference, more admiration. A young manager, barely out of college, looked at me and said, "You always walked like you were building something." Now I see what it was. I smiled. I still am. We went over new expansion plans. I adjusted the direction. More eco-based packages, outreach to local women-led vendors, scholarship programs. Not because it looked good on paper, but because I could. Because power should ripple outward. For once, I wasn't doing it to prove I deserved the space. I was doing it because I finally understood. I already had it. Later, I sat again by the lake, the same place where years ago I'd stood crying behind a tree during my own birthday party. Dad had called me a disappointment in lipstick that night. I remember the taste of cake and shame mixing in my throat. Now I let that memory float to the surface, not to drown in it, but to watch it drift. "You were wrong," I whispered. "I was never too ugly to be here." The wind moved across the water, almost like applause, and with it, I let that girl go. The one who waited, who begged, who twisted herself to fit. She earned this morning. Later that afternoon, I hosted brunch on the upper deck. No family, just women like me. Women who'd been called too much, too loud, too ambitious, too invisible. We raised our glasses together, not to revenge, but resilience. I stood up, glass in hand. This isn't about proving them wrong anymore. It's about living like they never mattered. The clink of glasses echoed, and for once, mine wasn't missing.